Steve Harvey's eyes glistened with tears. He dropped the card in his hand. The studio, 300 people, held its breath. Because when that family pulled out a letter from their pockets, no one was ready for what came next. This is Family Feud. A place of laughter, buzzer sounds, and ridiculous answers that make America laugh over dinner. For 23 years, Steve Harvey has been the captain of this ship, cracking jokes, roasting contestants, keeping the energy high. He's seen it all. Families who can't spell, answers that defy logic, moments so absurd they go viral within hours. But on this particular Tuesday afternoon taping, something happened that Steve, in all his decades on television, had never experienced. Not on Family Feud. Not on his talk show. Not in any green room, any stage, any moment under the lights. A family walked onto that stage carrying more than just hope of winning $20,000. They carried a letter. A 3-page letter. Written by a woman who would never see this episode air. Written by a mother who knew her time was ending, but refused to let her final words go unheard. And when Steve Harvey read the first line of that letter, the man who never stops talking couldn't speak. The Martinez family walked onto the Family Feud stage like any other family. Matching blue shirts. Nervous smiles. The kind of energy you get when you've rehearsed your introductions in the hotel mirror but know you're about to forget everything the second Steve asks your name. There were 5 of them. Paul Martinez, the father, mid-40s, construction worker hands, the kind of guy who wakes up at 5 a.m. without an alarm. His daughter Sophia, 29, a third-grade teacher with her mother's eyes. His son Diego, 17, high school senior, still figuring out how to stand in front of cameras. His daughter Isabella, 32, a nurse who'd taken a week off work she couldn't afford to be here. And finally, Paul's mother, Abuela Rosa, 74 years old, who insisted on wearing her best pearl necklace for TV. The opponent family had already been introduced, the Johnsons, a loud, fun group from Tennessee who were already getting laughs. Steve was in his element. Smooth navy suit, signature mustache, that walk that's more of a performance than a movement. He read the first question off the card, got some ridiculous answer about things you shouldn't do on a first date. And the audience roared. Everything was normal. Everything was going exactly as planned. Then Steve turned to the Martinez family for their turn. He looked at Paul, smiled that Steve Harvey smile, and said, "All right, Paul, you ready? Let's see if your family can beat these guys." Paul nodded. But there was something in his eyes. Something Steve didn't catch at first, because he's looking at 100 faces a week, and they all carry something. But this was different. Paul wasn't just nervous. He was holding something back. Something heavy. Steve asked the question. Paul gave an answer. Solid answer. The board flipped, 32 points. The family celebrated, but it was muted. Like they were all thinking about something else. Second round. Steve moved to Sophia. She was fidgeting with something in her pocket. A piece of paper. Folded. Old. The edges were worn, like it had been opened and closed 100 times. But Steve didn't see it yet. Because the show was still moving. The clock was still ticking. And no one stops Family Feud in the middle of a game. 3 questions in, the Martinez family was doing well. Not dominating, but holding their own. Steve was pacing between the 2 podiums, doing his thing, commentary, jokes, the occasional look into the camera like, "Can you believe this answer?" Then came question 4. Steve read the card. "Name something people say they'll do tomorrow but never actually do." It was Diego's turn. The 17-year-old kid. He stepped up to the podium, looked at Steve, and for a moment he just stood there. Silent. His hands were shaking. Steve, always quick to fill silence, leaned in with a grin. "You all right, Diego? You look like you've seen a ghost, man." Diego opened his mouth to answer. But instead of words, his eyes filled with tears. Steve's smile faded. Not all the way. He's a professional, he knows how to hold a room, but it softened. He put a hand on Diego's shoulder. Hey. It's okay. You got this. Take your time. But Diego wasn't crying because he didn't know the answer. He was crying because he did. And it wasn't about the game anymore. He looked at his father. Paul nodded. Then Diego turned back to Steve and said, voice cracking, "Spend time with family?" The board dinged. Number 1 answer. 48 points. The audience clapped. But it wasn't the usual explosion of applause. It was quieter. Confused. Like they sensed something but didn't know what. Steve looked at Diego. Then at Paul. Then at Sophia, who now had the letter fully out of her pocket, unfolded, trembling in her hands. And that's when Steve Harvey, for the first time in 23 years of hosting Family Feud, stopped the game. He didn't look at the producers. Didn't check with the cameras. He just held up his hand, turned to the audience and said, "Hold on. Hold on." The studio went silent. You could hear the hum of the lights. Steve walked over to Sophia. Looked at the letter in her hands. Then he looked at Paul and asked softly, "What is this?" Paul's voice broke when he answered. "It's from my wife. Diego and Sophia's mom. Isabella's sister." He paused. Took a breath. "She passed away 4 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. She wrote this before she died. She wanted us to bring it here. To you. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead." Steve Harvey has interviewed thousands of people. He's heard stories of triumph, loss, redemption. He's hugged strangers on his talk show, prayed with people in green rooms, given advice to faces he'll never see again. But this was different. Because this wasn't a scripted moment. This wasn't a planned segment with soft music and a teleprompter. This was a family, standing in the middle of a game show, holding a letter from a woman who knew she'd never see them win, but wanted to make sure they knew something before they walked onto that stage. Steve took the letter from Sophia's hands. His hands were steady, but his face wasn't. He looked at the family, then at the audience, then back at the letter. He unfolded it slowly, carefully, like it was made of something more fragile than paper. The first line read, "To my family, and to Steve, if you're reading this, thank you for giving them a moment to smile again." Steve stopped. He looked up at the ceiling, bit his bottom lip, and closed his eyes for just a second. When he opened them, they were wet. He cleared his throat. Looked at the camera. Then back at the letter. And he started reading aloud. "My name was Ana Martinez. By the time you're reading this, I'm already gone. I've known for 6 months that I wouldn't make it to see my kids on this show. It was something we talked about doing together. A family trip. A chance to laugh, to compete, to feel like we were part of something bigger than hospital rooms and treatment schedules. I won't be there. But I need you to know something, Steve. My family, my husband, my kids, my mother-in-law who I love like my own blood, they are the strongest people I know. Not because they didn't cry. Not because they pretended everything was fine. But because they showed up. Every single day. They sat with me. They laughed with me. They held my hand when I couldn't hold theirs back. And now they're standing on your stage, and I need you to do something for me. I need you to remind them that life doesn't stop when someone you love is gone. It pauses. It aches. But it doesn't stop. And they're allowed to laugh again. They're allowed to play again. They're allowed to feel joy without guilt. So Steve, if they're standing there looking nervous, if they're crying, if they seem like they're somewhere else, just know they're carrying me with them. Not as a weight. But as a reminder that love doesn't end. It just changes shape. Thank you for being the person who makes people smile. Keep making my family smile. They've earned it. With gratitude, Anna." By the time Steve finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Not in the audience. Not with the Johnson family on the opposite podium, who were now wiping their faces and nodding. Not with the crew, cameras still rolling, but operators standing frozen, tears on their cheeks. Steve folded the letter carefully. He handed it back to Sophia, but she shook her head. "She wanted you to keep it," Sophia whispered. She said you'd know what to do with it. Steve looked at the letter. Then at the family. Then he did something no one expected. He took off his jacket. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. Steve Harvey's suits are legendary. Custom-made. Pristine. He treats them like armor. In 23 years, he's never taken off a jacket mid-show. Never. Not for a bit. Not for a gag. Not for anything. But he took it off now. He walked over to Paul and draped it over his shoulders. "You're gonna wear this today," Steve said, voice thick. "Because your wife was right. You showed up. All of you. And that's what champions do." Then he turned to Diego. Pulled a card from his pocket, his personal business card, the one he doesn't hand out on TV, and pressed it into the kid's hand. "You call me if you ever need anything. College. Job. Someone to talk to. You hear me?" Diego nodded, couldn't speak. Steve turned to Sophia. "That letter? I'm keeping it. Not because she told me to. But because I'm gonna read it every time I forget why I do this job." Then he looked at Isabella, the nurse, and said, "Your mom said life doesn't stop. She's right. So we're gonna finish this game. And you're gonna win. Not because I'm rigging it." The audience laughed through tears. "But because you've already won the thing that matters." He turned to Abuela Rosa, who hadn't said a word, just stood there clutching her pearls and crying softly. Steve walked up to her, took her hands, and said, "You raised a beautiful family, Abuela. Ana knew that. And now the whole world knows it too." The audience exploded into applause. Not the polite TV applause. The real kind. The kind that comes from 300 strangers who just witnessed something they'll tell people about for years. The Johnson family walked across the stage, broke every rule of Family Feud, and hugged the Martinez family. Both families stood there, arms around each other, while Steve stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, watching. And then he turned to the producers off camera and said, "We're taking a break. I don't care. We're taking a break." They did. For 20 minutes. The cameras stopped. The Martinezes sat on the stage steps. The Johnsons sat with them. Steve sat with them. No mics. No lights. Just people. When they came back, they finished the game. The Martinez family won. Not by much, but they won. And when the final points went up on the board, the entire studio stood up and cheered. Steve handed Paul the oversized check. But Paul didn't look at it. He looked at Steve and said, "Thank you for reading her words." Steve nodded. "Thank you for trusting me with them." But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. After the taping ended, after the audience filed out, after the Johnson family took photos and left, Steve Harvey stayed. He sat on the stage, still in his vest and tie, no jacket, and he read Anna's letter again. This time alone. A producer asked if he was okay. Steve didn't answer right away. He just folded the letter, put it in his pocket, and said, "We need to air this." Now, here's the thing about Family Feud. It's a game show. It's light. It's fun. Networks don't want heavy. They want laughs and buzzers and ridiculous answers that get clipped for TikTok. But Steve fought for this episode to air in full. Unedited. Every tear. Every pause. Every second of that 20-minute break where the cameras were off, he told the editors to leave the gap in the footage. "People need to know we stopped," he said. "They need to know we're still human." The episode aired 3 weeks later. Within 24 hours, it became the most watched Family Feud episode in the show's history. Over 12 million people watched it live. By the end of the week, the clip had 200 million views across platforms. But the numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is what happened after. Families started sending letters to Steve. Thousands of them. Letters from people who'd lost someone. Letters from people who didn't think they were allowed to smile anymore. Letters that said, "Thank you for showing us it's okay to keep living." Steve started reading them. Every single one. He couldn't respond to all of them. There were too many, but he read them. And he kept Anna's letter in his dressing room, framed next to a photo of the Martinez family on stage. 3 months later, Steve was on his talk show. He told the story again. But this time, he added something. He said, "Anna Martinez taught me something I thought I already knew. She taught me that the moments that matter aren't the ones we plan. They're the ones we allow. And if you're carrying someone with you, someone you've lost, you're allowed to set them down long enough to laugh. They'd want you to. I promise you, they'd want you to. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." Diego Martinez is in college now, studying communications. He wants to work in TV. He says it's because of that day on Family Feud, because he saw what happens when someone with a platform chooses to stop and listen. Sophia still teaches 3rd grade. But now, once a year, she brings her students to Family Feud tapings. She wants them to see what kindness looks like under pressure. Paul remarried 2 years later. A woman named Carmen, who never met Anna but loves the family like Anna did. Paul says Anna would have liked her. And on his wedding day, he wore Steve's jacket. Steve had it cleaned and sent it to him with a note. "She's still with you. Now go live." Steve Harvey still hosts Family Feud. Still cracks jokes. Still roasts contestants who give ridiculous answers. But in his dressing room, framed on the wall, is a 3-page letter from a woman he never met. And every time he walks onto that stage, he carries it with him. Not in his pocket. In his chest. Because Anna Martinez reminded him of something every person with a microphone should remember. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more people willing to stop, listen, and let love speak. That's the legacy. Not the ratings. Not the viral clip. The legacy is that on one Tuesday afternoon, a game show became a church. And Steve Harvey became a witness to the fact that even in our grief, even in our loss, we are never truly alone. Because love doesn't end when someone dies. It just finds new voices. And sometimes those voices speak through a letter, a family, and a man brave enough to stop the show.